Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Backlog Bunker. This week, I'm only going to talk about one game, and that's Rhythm Heaven Groove, because I've been loving Rhythm Heaven Groove. For the purposes of future-proofing the video I'm going to make, I've been writing down my notes on basically everything in the game. So for the sake of brevity, I won't talk about everything that I wrote down, but I just want to touch on the key points. Like, for one, the fact that this game is probably like the third best Rhythm Heaven. Now what do I mean by that? Well, Mega Mix is obviously the best Rhythm Heaven game because despite all of its shortcomings like the really boring story and the really too much dialogue, it simply comes down to the fact that it plays the best and it has the best quality of life features. Then second place goes to Fever. It's obviously not all that special in the grand scheme of things, but it just has a lot of really solid games in it. Then you have Tengoku and DS. DS is obviously the worst one because it controls like shit, and while Tengoku is really good, it still just isn't all that great when it comes to a lot of its games. Which isn't its fault, it was the first one, but its version of Karate Man is like the most boring one, by far. Which means that I'd say that places Groove somewhere in the middle. Now of course, I haven't finished the game, but so far I've only been playing sequels, and so I assume that that'll more or less stay the same until I get to the end. And of the games that I've played, they're really good, but I don't know if they're Fever good. This is not to say that Fever doesn't have its stinkers, because it absolutely does. Exhibition Match is a bottom 3 game in the entire franchise. But when Fever hits, and it hits pretty often, especially when it comes to the remixes, which Groove absolutely does not. Again, I haven't finished it, but the remixes that I've done so far have not left a very good impression. A lot of Fever remixes are really good, because more often than not, it's greater than the sum of its parts. My go-to example is always Remix 5, because it has some of the worst games in Fever, and yet Remix 5 itself is kind of a banger. In Groove, on the other hand, more often than not it's the opposite. Some of the best games can be in a remix that I think sucks dick. This means when I compare Groove and Fever to each other, I start thinking a lot of Fever's high highs and its consistently good remixes, and then I start looking at Groove and its consistently good games, but not very high highs. Numerically, I'd say Fever had way more S-tier games than Groove does. This isn't to mention the fact that, at least so far, Groove does not have the advantage that every other Rhythm Heaven except for Tengoku has had. That being, the opportunity to iterate on previous games. There are quite a few spiritual sequels to games. Deep Sea is basically Micro Row, A for Effort is a type of launch party, Spirit Slasher is Samurai Slice and everything but name. But in terms of pure, straightforward improvements on games, like a lot of them in Fever, and basically all of them in Mega Mix, there's effectively none in Groove. This becomes more of a problem when I think about the fact that I, as someone who has rolled credits on the game, have not seen Karate Man. Far be it from me to make calls about a game that I haven't finished, but again, I rolled credits, and I'm only playing sequels right now, which would lead me to believe that there is not going to be a Karate Man in this game, which is weird because there has been a Karate Man in every single Rhythm Heaven game. I certainly appreciate the effort of creating 80 brand new original games, at least that's what it says in the box, but Rhythm Heaven has never had the problem of taking too much from its past. If anything, the parts it takes from its past are some of the most exciting parts of Rhythm Heaven. Again, it is fun to see Karate Man show up in every single Rhythm Heaven game. Karate Man was the first Rhythm game, and so it's fun to see it show up as the finale in both Fever and Mega Mix. Hell, speaking of Mega Mix, that's the only Rhythm Heaven game that you could possibly accuse of taking too much from its past, but that's like the whole point of that game. It's a Mega Mix. It almost makes me feel like Groove is an overcorrection, where we go from a game that's celebrating the series and has 75% old games, to a game that's a grand return for the series, and therefore features 0 old games. It's by no means the biggest sticking point for me when it comes to Groove, but it is really disappointing. Though, to keep on the topic of Mega Mix and things that Groove isn't taking from its past, it isn't taking a lot of the quality of life improvements from Mega Mix. In all fairness, I can't really have expected them to adapt to the timing display from Mega Mix given that the Switch doesn't have a bottom screen, but even just simple things like the ability to skip an intro for a game and just get right into it is annoying, which is especially annoying in Groove given that almost all the sequels have tutorials. In previous Rhythm Heaven games, unless they were introducing a new mechanic, a sequel would not have a tutorial because they would expect you to have remembered how to play the game from the original. In Groove, this is not the case. Almost all of them have tutorials, and the ones that don't, weirdly don't for no reason. For example, Stop and Go and Stop has a sequel where, again, there are no new mechanics, but there is a tutorial to remind you how to play. But at the same time, Stop and Roll has a tutorial that they outright tell you to skip because they don't tell you anything in it, it's just fun facts about Darumas. For as far as I've played the game, there is no rhyme or reason to it. Though one last thing I wanted to mention about Groove that is a praise is that, unlike previous Rhythm Heaven games, Groove has way more vocal tracks. For as far as I've played Groove, every single column of games has one vocal track in it. And there are more. If the menu option for vocal tracks is to be believed, there are 12 in the game, which is at least double every other Rhythm Heaven game, sometimes more. For reference, I think the Rhythm Heaven game with the most number of vocal tracks in it is Fever, and that's only 6. To put it simply, Groove definitely isn't the best Rhythm Heaven, but I'm really happy with it, especially because of the fact that I got it for only $40. $40 was how much 3DS games cost when I was a kid, so I'd argue the value proposition here is kind of unbeatable. But enough about Rhythm Heaven, now it's time to get to the weekly topic, which is the fact that PlayStation is no longer going to be making discs. This is very ironic for me, since the whole reason I even got a PS5 in the first place was because me being primarily a PC player, I wanted a console that I could have physical versions of my games on. And because I figured that with the PS5 Pro being digital only, the PS6 probably wasn't going to be taking any discs. So while it's nice to feel vindicated, I do have to admit that this is a very nuanced and complicated conversation. Nah, I'm just fucking with you. But imagine if I did the bit twice though. No, the actual weekly topic this week is whether or not number notation is good in fighting games. A bit random, yeah, but Tokon is coming up and I want to get ahead of the conversation before people start arguing about this when it comes to anime games again. So, number notation. Instead of saying crouching medium, you say 2M. Is that stupid? No. It takes a very, very minimal amount of learning to figure out how numpad works. I get that for slightly younger players it's not really going to make all that much sense because they haven't had to use a phone or a keyboard that's had a numpad in it ever. But also, like, who cares? It's not like knowing or not knowing how a numpad works will make you any more or less inclined to knowing how numpad notation works, because it's literally just assigning numbers to directions, that's it. And even then, you don't have to remember all that much, because generally, the only numbers you'll ever see are 1 through 6. And almost always in the same order too. Honestly, the only one that still trips me up nowadays is when people say 5 blank, because 5 is just neutral. You wouldn't say, oh, input the direction in neutral, you just wouldn't put any direction. Part of the reason I made this the weekly topic was because a lot of people are talking about Rivals players going onto Tokon, and it's gonna suck. It's gonna suck for a while. Not even just from Rivals players, but from Marvel fans in general. And of course the classic group of people who hate fighting games but just want to play them so fucking bad. So even though people will swear up and down they want to play casually, but they never actually do, just remember that numpad notation always exists for helping people learn, but they'll never ever use it. Because gamers with a hard R would rather die 1,000 deaths than ever admit that they just suck. Though I also don't want to see any fighting game players acting like they're above foolishness either. If I see any of you Street Fighter fuckers calling heavy or medium fierce or whatever the hell it's called, get out. Which is what all of you should do, because the video's over.